I flew escort that day because nobody else wanted the milk run, and because the Hollow Accord's captain had asked for me by name. 3 tour of nothing happening will do that. You become the pilot people trust to keep nothing happening. I should say what that reputation cost me, because it matters to what comes after. I'd come up through interceptor school with a flight record full of red marks for exactly the kind of flying that gets you noticed, and then quietly grounded for review, close passes, aggressive lines, maneuvers that worked, but that no instructor wanted to put their name behind approving. By the time I made my first deployment, I'd learned to fly clean and boring on purpose, because clean and boring is what gets you assigned to the missions that matter. The hands hadn't forgotten the other kind of flying. They'd just been told to wait. The Sidren Drift is not a place that wants ships in it. It's the wreck of 2 stars that died wrong, close enough together that their leavings never settled into anything as polite as a belt. It's just debris, all the way down, drifting in lazy non-orbits that take centuries to mean anything. The Corps and I built their verdict array in the calmest pocket of it they could find, which still wasn't calm. I remember thinking that was on purpose. Everyone who came to be judged had to survive the approach first. The charts called the drift survivable, and they weren't lying exactly. They just left out how much of survivable depended on nothing going wrong for the duration of the crossing. I'd flown it twice before on quieter business and come away from both passes thinking the same thing, that a place could be quiet and dangerous at once, the way deep water is quiet, the way a held breath is quiet. The Accord was a courier, slow and broad in the beam, built for patience rather than speed, because patience was the entire job. The Corps and I concourse doesn't decide anything quickly. I'd read the brief twice and still found it hard to credit. A species, if you can call a hive mind spread across 10,000 drone nodes a species that votes by accretion. They don't deliberate, they observe, for months. Every drone node that crosses your path folds its sliver of opinion back into the whole, and somewhere past some threshold nobody, outside the concourse, has ever been told. A verdict simply exists. No vote is cast. No hand is raised. The decision accretes like sediment, like a species had decided that haste was the only sin worth legislating against. We weren't even at the trial yet. We were just approaching it. The Hollow Accord carried our case file, our request, our patience offered up as a kind of collateral, and somewhere out past her bow already, the first drone nodes were watching. I could see them on long range, scattered through the debris like dust that had learned to hold still, small, dark, motionless until you looked away. "Stay loose, Calloway," the Accord's captain said over the link, the way he said it every time, like a man checking a door he already knew was locked. "We're not the show yet." "Copy," I said, and meant it less than I had the tour before. It happened 40 minutes later, and it happened the way these things always seem to, not with a warning, but with the absence of one. A fragment the navigational charts had logged as inert, a piece of one dead star's leftover crust drifting on a track that had been stable for longer than anyone alive, clipped the Accord's drive section at a closing speed nobody's model had accounted for. I didn't see the impact. I saw the result. The Accord's aft running lights stuttering, her hull yawing off her line, and then the slow, sickening tumble of a ship whose drive had stopped arguing with physics on her behalf. She was going into the field. Not quickly, nothing in the drift does anything quickly, but with absolute certainty, drifting deeper into a wreckage lane dense enough that her hull would meet something else within the hour, and there would be no controlled meeting about it. Protocol said hold position. Protocol said report the failure, request concourse assistance through the proper channel, and wait, because we were guests in someone else's graveyard, and guests do not improvise. I heard the words form in my own head in my own training officer's voice. I had maybe 4 seconds before they would have been the last thing I did about it. I didn't decide to break protocol. I want to be honest about that, all these years later. I decided the Accord's drive section was venting, that venting meant fire risk in a hull with 11 crew and a diplomatic case officer who'd never flown anything more dangerous than a desk, and that the math on getting her stable myself was better than the math on waiting for an answer from a species that took months to agree on anything. The protocol broke because the arithmetic broke it first. I took the wraith call in. The field doesn't forgive bad instincts, and I want to say I was perfect, and I wasn't. I clipped a fragment on the second pass that left a long, bright scar down my port intake and very nearly put me into a spin I wouldn't have walked away from. But I'd flown debris fields before, never one this dense, never with these stakes, but the hands remember what the mind panics about. I matched the Accord's tumble, killed my relative velocity to nothing, and put my hull against hers, not a docking. Nothing so clean, just the flat of my nose against her flank, engines holding, walking her sideways out of the lane the way you'd lean a fence post back into true. Every correction she made on her own, fighting a drive that wasn't answering her anymore. I matched and bled off, an inch at a time, for 11 minutes that felt considerably longer. There was a moment, maybe halfway through, when a piece of wreckage the size of a shuttle came drifting across our combined path at an angle neither of our hulls could absorb. I had no time to call it, and no time to think about calling it. I broke contact, rolled the wraith call under the Accord's belly, took the fragment's edge on my dorsal plating instead of letting it find her drive section, and came back up on the other side to re-engage before she drifted more than a few meters off the line I'd built her. The captain's voice came over the link once, tight and flat, "Calloway, report," and I didn't answer him, because answering would have cost me the half-second I needed to put my nose back where it belonged. I made up the silence to him afterward. I've never been sure he fully forgave it, even knowing how it ended. I didn't think about who was watching. I want that on the record too. I wasn't performing. There wasn't room in my head for an audience. There was room for vectors and the next 4 seconds and the one after that. It was only once she was clear, drifting steady on a survivable heading, her crew already venting the fire I'd guessed at, that I looked up. In the loose way you look up after holding your breath, and saw how many drone nodes had gathered. They weren't scattered anymore. They'd drawn in close, a slow tightening of small dark shapes around both our hulls, hundreds of them where I'd counted maybe 40 before, and I understood late, the way you understand most important things, that I had not been flying alone in that field. I had been flying inside the trial. The concourse doesn't speak the way a person speaks. What came over the link wasn't a voice so much as a presence that had decided to be a voice for exactly as long as the sentence required. It told us, without preamble, that the observation period had been suspended. That the standard accretion required months because no single act had ever been considered sufficient evidence of a species' nature. Not strength, not weapons, not even kindness, because all of those could be staged for an audience that was known to be watching. What had just happened, it said, could not have been staged. There had been no time to perform it, and no certainty of an audience while it was happening. It had been done anyway. The verdict accreted in under a minute. I'm told that's never happened before or since. They granted the Hollow Accord her endorsement on the spot, full contact tier, no probation, no further observation, and signed the framework treaty inside the same hour, drafted by a species that I'd been warned took years to agree on punctuation. The Accord's captain handled the diplomacy. I sat in my cockpit with a scarred intake and shaking hands and let someone else say the official words. It was a long time before anyone asked me why I'd done it, and longer still before I had an answer worth giving. People want to hear that I weighed the odds and trusted my training, and there's some truth in that. But the truth underneath it is smaller and harder to be proud of. I didn't have time to be brave about it. I just had time to be certain, for about half a second, that I could thread that field, and then no time at all left over to doubt it. I think that's the part the concourse actually voted on. Not the rescue. The half-second before it, where a species that prizes deliberation above almost everything watched one of us decide, instantly and completely, without a committee, without a vote, without months to accrete an answer, and turned out to be right.